The massive meeting hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a giant silver bowl, filled with creatures that looked like they came from nightmares and dreams. 14 different alien species sat in their special chairs, each one designed for their weird bodies. The air buzzed with excitement and fear as they waited for the big announcement. Ambassador Kethavar stood up from his chair made of glowing crystal. He was a scary-looking thing with 4 long arms and eyes that looked like broken glass. When he spread all 4 arms wide, it looked like he was trying to hug the whole room. His mouth made clicking and buzzing sounds that no human could understand, but the translation machine turned his words into something everyone could hear. "My friends," the machine voice said in a cold, emotionless tone, "6 months have passed since we destroyed the human colonies. 6 long months of beautiful silence from the most dangerous species we have ever met." The other aliens started making their own happy sounds. The Valdari looked like giant octopuses, and their thick tentacles wiggled with joy. The Nexari were made of living rock and metal, and they flashed bright lights in patterns that meant they were pleased. Every alien in the room seemed thrilled about what they had done to humanity. "The humans have finally learned where they belong," Kethavar continued, his translation getting louder and more confident. "New Geneva, Titan's Rest, Haven Prime, we turned all 3 colonies into nothing but dust and smoke. And what did Earth do about it? Absolutely nothing. They didn't send even 1 warship to fight us. They didn't even send us an angry message." The aliens laughed in their strange ways. Some made gurgling sounds, others flashed colors, and a few just sat there looking smug. They thought they had won the greatest victory in galactic history. They thought they had finally put humans in their place, as weak, scared creatures who would never fight back. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. Far away from their fancy meeting hall, in a place called the Void Sector where no alien scanner could reach, something incredible was happening. In the shadow of a dead star that had collapsed into itself millions of years ago, workers were putting the finishing touches on the biggest, most powerful warship anyone had ever built. Commander Lee Jun stood on the bridge of a smaller ship called the Quiet Thunder. He was not a young man anymore. His face was marked with lines from years of worry and hard decisions. His dark eyes watched through the thick windows as sparks flew from the giant ship being built outside. Human workers in spacesuits moved, like ants across the huge metal surface, welding the final pieces into place. Lee Jun had seen terrible things in his life, but nothing compared to the videos that had come from the 3 destroyed colonies. The aliens hadn't just attacked, they had taken their time, making sure every human man, woman, and child suffered before they died. They had recorded everything and sent it to the Galactic Council like it was some kind of entertainment. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. Lieutenant Park Hana was young, maybe 25 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone her age. She worked at the communications station, surrounded by screens showing messages from all over human space. "All Ghost Fleet vessels are reporting they're ready, sir. The retribution is finally complete." Lee Jun nodded slowly but didn't turn around. He kept watching the massive ship outside. It was 3 kilometers long, longer than most cities. Its hull was black as space itself, covered in armor that could stop anything the aliens might throw at it. But the real power of the ship wasn't in its weapons or armor. The real power was in what it represented. For 6 months, the aliens had been celebrating. They thought humanity was broken, defeated, too scared to fight back. They had studied human history and seen all the wars, all the violence, all the times humans had exploded in anger. They expected the same thing to happen after the colonies were destroyed. They expected humans to come charging at them with guns blazing, making stupid mistakes because they were too angry to think straight. Instead, humanity had gone quiet, not because they were scared, but because they were planning. Every day that the aliens celebrated was another day that human engineers, soldiers, and scientists worked in secret. They pooled resources from every human world, took the smartest people from every human colony, and focused on one single goal. The aliens wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. Now humanity was ready to teach them a lesson right back. Lee Jun finally turned away from the window. His weathered face showed no emotion. but his eyes burned with a cold fire that had been building for 6 months. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. Every person on this ship had lost someone in the colony attacks. Every person had a reason to see this mission through to the end. "Lieutenant Park," he said in a voice as calm as still water, "send the signal to all Ghost Fleet commanders. Tell them it's time." The young woman's fingers moved across her control panel. Across human space, hidden ships began to move toward their targets. The silence was about to end, and the galaxy was about to learn that human patience was far more dangerous than human anger had ever been. Deep beneath the Swiss mountains, in a place where the sun never shone, Captain Kim Day knelt before a wall that seemed to stretch on forever. The black stone was smooth and cold like the surface of a frozen lake, and carved into it were thousands upon thousands of names. Each name told a story. Each name was someone's child, parent, friend, or lover, who would never come home again. Kim Day's hands shook as he carefully carved the letters with his small metal tool. The scraping sound echoed in the huge underground chamber as he worked. Choi Mina, age 7, Haven Prime Colony. Just 7 years old, she should have been playing, with toys, learning to read, maybe starting to lose her baby teeth. Instead, her name was going on this wall of the dead. The memorial hall stretched for kilometers in every direction, like an underground city made entirely of grief. When they first started building it 6 months ago, they thought one wall would be enough. They were wrong. As more and more reports came in from the destroyed colonies, they had to keep building. More walls, more corridors, more space for names that should have been carved on birthday cakes instead of tombstones. Kim Day closed his eyes and tried not to remember the recordings. The survivors who had escaped Haven Prime had managed to hide a communication device before the aliens cut all contact. What they recorded would haunt humanity forever. The alien forces hadn't come to Haven Prime to fight a battle. They had come to put on a show. The hegemony soldiers had landed with their weapons and equipment, but they didn't rush to finish their job. Instead, they had divided the colony into sections, like slicing up a cake. They worked through each section, slowly, methodically, making sure every human was found. But they didn't just kill them quickly. They took their time. They wanted the humans to be afraid. They wanted them to suffer. Worst of all, they recorded everything. Every scream, every plea for mercy, every moment of terror was captured on video and sent back to the Galactic Council. The aliens watched these recordings like humans might watch a sports game, cheering when something particularly cruel happened. They called it a demonstration of their enforcement capabilities. They were showing the entire galaxy what happened. "To species that didn't know their place, Captain," a gentle voice said behind him. Admiral Yoon Soo walked across the stone floor, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She was a small woman, barely over 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like someone who had seen war and survived it. Her dress uniform was navy blue, with silver buttons, and on her collar was a new symbol nobody had seen before, a ghost ship sailing through stars. "The Council's latest intelligence reports came in," she said, stopping beside Kim Day. "Their spies think we're finished. They believe humanity is too broken to fight back." Kim Day set down his carving tool and stood up slowly. His knees ached from kneeling for so long, and his back was sore from hunching over the wall. He was not a young man anymore, and the weight of so much death was making him feel even older. But when he looked at Admiral Yoon, there was something burning in his eyes that had nothing to do with age. "Good," he said simply. "Let them think that." The aliens had done their homework before attacking humanity. They had studied human history, going back thousands of years. They had read about human wars, human violence, human anger. They saw how humans reacted when they were hurt, usually by lashing out without thinking, making mistakes because they were too emotional to plan properly. The aliens expected humans to come charging at them within days of the colony attacks. They expected poorly planned revenge missions, angry fleets rushing to their deaths, human leaders making stupid decisions because they were blinded by rage. That's what always happened when humans got hurt, according to their research. But the aliens had missed something important in all their studying. Yes, humans could be violent and emotional. Yes, they often acted without thinking when they were angry. But humans also had another side that was much more dangerous. When pushed far enough, when hurt deeply enough, humans could take all that, rage and grief and anger, and turn it into something cold and precise and absolutely terrifying. They could turn pain into purpose. They could transform screaming grief into deadly patience. They could take the worst moment of their lives and use it to fuel the most important mission they would ever undertake. The retribution launches tomorrow, Admiral Yoon continued, her voice barely above a whisper in the huge stone chamber. Commander Lee has finished selecting his crew. Every single person volunteered. Every single person lost someone in the attacks. Kim Dae nodded and ran his fingers over the fresh carving of little Choi Mina's name. The stone was still rough where he had cut it, small pieces of rock dust clinging to the letters. In a few hours, someone would come and polish it smooth, and her name would join the thousands of others in their eternal silence. But that silence wouldn't last forever. Tomorrow, the retribution would launch, carrying with it the concentrated grief and determination of an entire species. The aliens had wanted to teach humanity about power, about what happened to species that didn't know their place in the galactic order. Now it was humanity's turn to be the teacher, and the lesson they were about to give would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The aliens thought they understood humans. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The hangar bay of the retribution was so huge, it could have held a small city. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into shadows, and the walls were made of metal so thick they could stop a nuclear explosion. But right now, all that massive space was filled with just 300 people standing in neat rows, looking up at their commander. Commander Lee Jun stood on a raised platform in front of them, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not a tall man, but something about the way he carried himself made him seem bigger than he was. His dark uniform was simple and clean, with no fancy decorations or shiny medals. He didn't need them. Everyone in that hangar knew exactly who he was and what he had sacrificed to get them to this moment. The 300 crew members stood perfectly still, but Lee Jun could see the pain in their eyes. Every single person in that room had volunteered for this mission, and every single person had lost someone they loved. Lieutenant Park Hana stood in the front row, her young face trying to stay professional, even though her parents had died screaming on New Geneva. Engineer Oh Kyung was near the back, his hands clenched into fists because his wife and little daughter had been murdered on Titan's Rest. These weren't soldiers looking for glory or adventure. These were people who had watched their worlds burn and decided to do something about it. They were teachers and doctors and mechanics and computer programmers who had put on military uniforms because someone had to make sure this never happened again. "Listen to me carefully," Lee Jun's voice rang out across the hangar, bouncing off the metal walls and coming back as an echo. "We are not going out there to conquer anyone. We are not invaders looking to steal planets or resources. We are something much more important than that. We are a message." He paused and looked across the faces of his crew. Some were old, with gray hair and wrinkled hands that had worked for decades to build the colonies that were now ash. Others were barely out of their teens, kids who should have been worrying about school and dating instead of preparing for war. But they all had the same look in their eyes, a cold fire that had been burning for 6 months. "The ship you're standing in is unlike anything humanity has ever built before," Lee Jun continued. "The retribution is 3 kilometers long. That's longer than most mountains are tall. Its armor can adapt to any weapon the aliens might use against it. Its weapon systems use technology that pushes the very limits of what physics says is possible." He gestured toward the walls around them, and for a moment, everyone could feel the incredible power humming through the ship's systems. The retribution wasn't just big. It was smart. Its computers could think faster than any human brain. Its weapons could hit targets from impossible distances, and its engines could push it through space at speeds that would have been pure fantasy just a year ago. But all of that power means nothing compared to what this ship really represents, Lee Jun said, his voice getting quieter but somehow more intense. "This ship is proof that humanity learned something from our mistakes. We learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you choose not to destroy." The hangar was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Everyone understood what he meant. The aliens had studied human history and seen nothing but violence and war. They expected humans to come charging at them with guns blazing, making the same mistakes humans had always made when they were angry. The Ghost Fleet will strike simultaneously across 12 different star systems in exactly 18 hours, Lee Jun announced. But we will not be targeting cities or civilian populations. We will hit only military installations, only weapons factories, only the places where they build the tools they use to hurt innocent people. Engineer Oh Kyung raised his hand slightly. He was a big man with calloused hands who had spent his whole life building things instead of breaking them. Commander, what about their families, their children? Lee Jun's expression didn't change. We will not touch them. We will not become the monsters that the aliens think we are. We will show them that humans can be angry without being evil, that we can seek justice without becoming the very thing we're fighting against. Chief Medical Officer Song Yan stepped forward from the crowd. She was an older woman who had volunteered to come on this mission, even though she could have stayed safely on Earth. Sir, what about the Galactic Council Station? What's our plan for them? For the first time since he had started speaking, Lee Jun's expression changed. His eyes grew hard as steel, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 6 months of carefully controlled rage. That's where we deliver our message personally, he said. The council sat and watched while innocent people were murdered for their entertainment. They need to understand that some actions have consequences. Some crimes cannot be ignored. The retribution wasn't just a warship floating in space. It was a declaration written in metal and energy that said some things were unforgivable. It was a promise that humanity would never again stand by while the strong preyed on the weak. It was proof that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks in rage, but the one who plans in silence. The aliens had wanted to break humanity's spirit, to teach them their place in the galactic order. Instead, they had created something they never expected. A humanity that had learned to combine its greatest strengths with its hardest-won wisdom. They had forged human anger into human purpose, and that combination was about to change the galaxy forever. Admiral Texmore was sipping his morning nutrient brew when the first report came in. He was sitting in his command chair aboard the Hegemony flagship, watching the daily patrol report scroll across his screen. Everything was normal, boring even. The humans had been quiet for 6 months now, and the galaxy had settled into a comfortable routine of hegemony dominance, sir. His communications officer called out, tentacles twitching nervously. We've lost contact with Scout Fleet Gamma. Texmore barely looked up from his drink. Equipment malfunction? Unknown, sir. They just stopped responding. All 12 ships at once. That got the Admiral's attention. He set down his drink and turned to face the main display screen. Scout Fleet Gamma had been patrolling the outer rim of hegemony space, a routine mission in a sector where nothing interesting had happened in decades. 12 modern warships didn't just stop talking all. At the same time, send a search team, he ordered. Find out what happened. But before the search team could even launch, more reports started coming in. Not just from one sector, but from all across hegemony space. Military bases going silent, weapon factories stopping production, communication relays shutting down, one by one. It was like someone was methodically turning off the lights across their entire empire. The strangest part was that there were no explosions, no distress calls, no signs of battle. The installations were just gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, just completely disabled and silent. It was as if invisible hands were reaching across space and gently putting the entire hegemony military to sleep. At the Kepler Station Weapons facility, Chief Engineer Vordan was reviewing the daily production reports when the lights went out. Not all at once, but in a pattern that moved across the massive factory floor like a wave. He looked up from his desk to see something that shouldn't have been possible. A ship was floating just outside the station's main windows. It was huge, maybe 3 times the size of their biggest battleship, but it moved without making a sound. Its hull was so black it seemed to eat the light from nearby stars, creating a shadow that fell across the entire facility like a dark blanket. How did it get so close? Fordown whispered to himself. Their sensors should have detected something that big from light years away. But somehow this ghost ship had appeared right next to them without triggering a single alarm. The ship didn't fire any weapons, it didn't even send a message. Instead, thin beams of energy reached out from its hull and touched the station's weapon systems. Everywhere the beams touched, machinery simply stopped working. Laser cannons powered down. Missile launchers went silent. Defense shields flickered and died. In less than 5 minutes, one of the hegemony's most important military installations had been turned into nothing more than a floating metal shell. Similar scenes were playing out across 12 different star systems. The Ghost Fleet had arrived, and they worked with a precision that was almost artistic. Each ship knew exactly where to strike and exactly what to disable. They moved like surgeons, cutting out only the parts of the hegemony war machine that could hurt innocent people, leaving everything else untouched. But the most important ship in the Ghost Fleet had a different target entirely. The Galactic Council station was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure that floated in space like a crystal city. It housed representatives from 14 different species and was considered the most secure location in the galaxy. Its shields could stop an entire fleet, and its sensors could detect a single ship from 3 star systems away. So when the Retribution appeared directly above the station without any warning, panic spread through the diplomatic complex like wildfire. Ambassador Kethvar burst onto the emergency command bridge, his 4 arms flailing as he ran. His compound eyes, which usually gleamed with arrogance and self-satisfaction, were now wide with terror. Behind him came representatives from the other species, all chattering and clicking and making their various sounds of fear and confusion. Impossible, Kethvar shouted at the sensor officer. Our detection systems are the best in the galaxy. How did something that massive get so close without us seeing it? The sensor officer, a nervous creature with too many tentacles, was frantically pushing buttons on his control panel. Sir, I don't understand it. One moment our sensors showed empty space, and the next moment that thing was just there. Through the main viewing window, they could all see the Retribution hanging above them like a storm cloud made of metal and death. It was so big it blocked out whole sections of stars, creating an artificial night that fell across the station. Its hull seemed to drink in the light from their windows, making it look less like a ship and more like a hole cut in reality itself. Because you see what we allow you to see, came a voice that filled every speaker in the station. It was calm, controlled, almost conversational. But there was something underneath that calm voice that made everyone's blood run cold. Every screen in the station flickered and changed to show the same image, a human man in a dark military uniform. He had gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard decisions and harder losses. When he looked into the camera, it felt like he was looking directly at each person watching. I am Commander Lee Jun of the Earth vessel Retribution, the human said. For 6 months you have celebrated the silence of humanity. You have told yourselves that we were broken, that we had learned our place in your galactic order. That silence ends now. As he spoke, the massive ship above them began to change. Its hull started moving and shifting, sections sliding apart, to reveal weapon systems that looked like nothing any of them had ever seen before. Energy began to build around the ship's various arrays, creating patterns of light that were both beautiful and terrifying. But the most frightening thing wasn't the weapons themselves. It was the fact that they didn't fire. The Retribution could have reduced the Council station to atoms in seconds, could have ended every life on board without breaking a sweat. Instead, it just waited there, demonstrating a level of restraint that was somehow more intimidating than any show of force could have been. You wanted to test human resolve, Commander Lee Jun continued, his voice still perfectly calm. You wanted to see what we would do when pushed beyond our limits. Consider this test complete. The ghost ships had become real, and with them came a reckoning that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Great Council chamber had never felt so small. What was once a place where alien ambassadors strutted around making grand speeches about their power now felt more like a courtroom where the guilty waited to hear their sentence. The curved walls that usually echoed with confident voices were now filled with nervous whispers and the sound of fear. Commander Lee Jun walked slowly to the center of the chamber, his boots clicking on the polished floor. He didn't hurry, didn't rush, didn't show any sign that he was in a hurry to get this over with. Around him, holographic displays flickered to life, filling the air with images that made every alien in the room look away in shame. The faces of the dead stared down at them from every angle. Children who would never grow up. Parents who would never see their kids take their first steps. Grandparents who had lived through decades of peace only to die in terror and pain. Thousands upon thousands of faces, each one a life that had been snuffed out for no reason other than to send a message about power. "You studied our history very carefully," Lee Jun said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber without him having to raise it. "You read about our wars, our violence, our tendency to lash out when we're hurt. You saw our capacity for destruction and decided that was all we were capable of." Ambassador Kethvar shifted nervously in his crystalline seat, his forearms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hide. The other alien representatives were no better. The proud Valdari delegation kept their tentacles pulled tight against their bodies. The silicon-based Nexari had dimmed their usual bright glow to barely a flicker. None of them wanted to meet the human's eyes. "You were wrong," Lee Jun continued, and now the holographic displays began to change. Instead of showing the faces of the dead, they started showing something else entirely. Images from the Ghost Fleet's strikes across hegemony space. Military bases that had been perfectly targeted and disabled without a single unnecessary death. Weapon factories that had been shut down while their workers were safely evacuated. Communication arrays that had been cut with surgical precision, leaving nearby civilian settlements completely untouched. 12 star systems, Lee Jun said, gesturing to the displays around him. 47 military installations. Hundreds of weapons platforms and defense stations, all of them disabled, in a single coordinated strike that took less than 6 hours to complete. The images kept coming, showing the incredible precision of the Ghost Fleet's work. In every case, the human ships had gone out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. Families living near military bases had been warned to evacuate hours before the strikes began. Hospital ships had been left completely alone even when they were docked at military ports. Even enemy soldiers had been given time to surrender and evacuate before their bases were destroyed. "Not a single civilian casualty," Lee Jun announced, and the words hung in the air like an accusation. "Not one innocent death across 12 entire star systems. This is what you failed to understand about humanity. This is our true nature." He turned slowly, making eye contact with each alien representative as he spoke. "The ability to choose, the wisdom to measure our response against the crime committed against us, the strength to be better than our worst impulses, even when we have every reason to give in to them." Ambassador Kethavar's translator was making strange grinding noises as it tried to process his panicked chittering. Finally, words came out, though they sounded broken and desperate. What do you want from us?" Before Lee Jun could answer, Lieutenant Park Hana stepped forward from where she had been standing near the entrance. She was so young, barely out of her 20s, but she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had seen the worst that the universe could offer, and decided to fight back anyway. Her parents had died on New Geneva, burned alive while alien soldiers laughed and recorded their screams. But when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "We want what you took from us," she said simply. "Peace. Safety for those who cannot defend themselves. A guarantee that no other species will ever have to face what humanity faced." The chamber fell completely silent. Outside the massive windows, the retribution hung in space like a sword of judgment. Its black hull absorbed the light from nearby stars, creating a shadow that fell across the entire diplomatic station. Everyone in that room knew that the massive human warship could reduce their station to atomic dust in seconds. They had seen what human technology was capable of, had witnessed precision strikes that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. But the most terrifying thing about the retribution wasn't its weapons. It was the restraint it showed in not using them. The aliens had expected humanity to come charging at them with guns blazing, to make the same mistakes that had marked human history for thousands of years. Instead, they had encountered something they had never seen before, a species that could be pushed to the very edge of rage and still choose mercy over vengeance. The Ghost Fleet will remain active, Lee Jun announced, his words carrying the weight of an unchangeable decree. Not as conquerors seeking to build an empire, not as invaders looking to steal resources or territory. We will serve as guardians, protectors of those who cannot protect themselves. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Any species that chooses to prey upon the defenseless will answer to us. Any civilization that decides genocide is an acceptable policy will face the consequences. The strong will no longer be allowed to destroy the weak simply because they can. The negotiations that followed took 3 days. 3 days of alien representatives who had once strutted around talking about their superiority now sitting quietly, while humans laid out the terms of a new galactic order. The galactic accord that emerged from those talks was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in galactic history, there would be real protection for smaller, weaker species. There would be consequences for aggression that went beyond strongly worded diplomatic protests. There would be someone watching, someone ready to step in when bullies decided to pick on those who couldn't fight back. The aliens had wanted to teach humanity about power, about knowing their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, they had awakened something they never expected, a protector whose greatest strength lay not in its willingness to destroy, but in its wisdom to choose when destruction wasn't necessary. The silence had ended, the watch had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.